Welcome to Nonsense Psychiatry, the podcast that cuts through the noise and the confusion surrounding mental health. My name is Mark and I'm your host, and my goal is to give you the clear, practical information you need to understand your own well-being. No jargon, no fluff, just honest, helpful tools to help you on your journey. Let's dive in.
No nonsense.
Hi and welcome back to No Nonsense Psychiatry, the podcast that gives you practical tools for navigating life's challenges. I'm your host and this is episode 80, Why Don't You Like Me When I'm Drunk? We've all seen the chaos, haven't we? The slurring, the stumbling, the unpredictable behaviour that makes people avoid those who are drunk. And in the last episode we discussed how the loss of control or the loss of predictability and the burden of safety make being around intoxicated people draining and likely frustrating. But if you choose to drink, how do you enjoy the social occasion without crossing the line into losing control? The good news is avoiding becoming drunk, as opposed to just drinking alcohol. It's primarily a matter of managing the rate and the amount of consumption relative to your body's ability to process it. It's science. And it isn't just about willpower. So in this episode, we're cutting through the excuses and giving you 3 effective strategies you can deploy today to stay sober, safe, and sharp at any social event. So we'll be covering the essential 1-to-1 ratio to manage your pace, why eating the right meal beforehand is the best defense, and how to use the decision shield to deflect the peer pressure before it even starts. If you're ready to reclaim your social control and avoid those awkward morning after regrets, let's dive in. So, drunk person getting into bizarre or particular situations is a staple of storytelling across literature, film and folklore. And these stories highlight the theme of loss of control and the chaos that ensues when the social inhibitions are gone. Here are a few famous examples where the state of being drunk leads to genuinely peculiar and surreal scenarios. So here's some literary examples. So the peculiar world of Wally Cox from P. Smith in The City by P.J. Wodehouse. While many of Wodehouse characters are drunk, the most peculiar situations often involve Wally Cox, who is frequently finding himself in a surreal and unexpected places due to being intoxicated. And the humour comes from the way the highly respectable, organised world collides with the chaotic, nonsensical reality of a drunk man. So this peculiar situation, the character might wake up believing that he's married the wrong person, or he's bought a non-existent property, or found himself unwittingly in a foreign country, only to have to piece together the highly confusing events of the night before. Bacchus and the divine drunkenness in Greek mythology. In mythology, the god of wine, Bacchus, or Dionysus, inspires a unique form of collective peculiar intoxication known as menu menos, or divine madness. So the peculiar situation is female followers, the Maenads, would enter a state of frenzied, ecstatic drunkenness, gaining superhuman strength and engaging in bizarre rituals like tearing apart wild animals with their bare hands. So this is one of the oldest portrayals of alcohol leading to behaviour that completely defies normal human limits and social constraints. Film and television examples, the Hangover series, I'm sure you've all heard of those, and these are perhaps the most iconic modern examples of peculiar situations caused by extreme drunkenness. The core premise hinges entirely on the chaos of intoxication. The peculiar situation is that these 3 groomsmen wake up in a Las Vegas hotel with amnesia, unable to account for their previous night's actions, and find a series of absurd items, being a tiger in the bathroom, a baby in the closet, and the groom's missing, forcing them to retrace a night of completely irrational decisions. And then there's Arthur in 1981 and the 2011 films, and the character Arthur Bach is played by, memorably by Dudley Moore, who is a lovable but constantly drunken billionaire whose peculiar situations arise from his unpredictable wealth combined with a lot of total lack of sobriety. So his situation was his intoxication allowed him to make grand, ridiculous gestures, like accidentally proposing marriage or spending millions on a frivolous nonsense or offending dignitaries, all the while maintaining this childlike charm that keeps him barely afloat in high society. His life itself is peculiar because his drunkenness is protected by his extreme wealth. And these stories kind of resonate, don't they? Because they allow the audience to explore the temptation of uninhibited, chaotic freedom while simultaneously highlighting the absurdity and severe consequences of completely losing control. But let's be honest, there is a dark side, right? The general discomfort or dislike people feel towards those who are drunk stems from how alcohol affects their behaviour, predictability, the communication, and of course the safety. Drunkenness often violates fundamental social contracts and psychological needs that we rely on in interactions. So here is the main reasons why people tend to dislike or avoid interactions with a drunk individual. So the first one is the loss of predictability and control. Alcohol impairs the ability to self-monitor and control impulses. A drunk person may shift mood drastically from overly affectionate to aggressively angry, making them unreliable and potentially frightening to those around them. We feel safe when we can predict how others will act, and drunkenness destroys that predictability. And then there's the lack of boundaries. Intoxication often leads to significant loss of social awareness, and drunk people might invade other people's personal space or speak inappropriately or touch people without permission or become excessively loud and creating discomfort and an environment where it just kind of feels out of control, doesn't it? And then there's the communication breakdown, so the impaired conversations. Communications become frustrating when the person is drunk, and they might repeat themselves, slur their words, or forget what they just said, or interrupt frequently, or focus solely on their own perspective without listening or leading to it kind of just leads into this one-sided and pointless interaction. And then there's the emotional intensity and projection. So alcohol can amplify emotions. A drunk person might be overly dramatic, demand attention, or project their own feelings like insecurity or sadness onto others, and forcing the sober person into an unwanted role of therapist or caretaker, which leads us into the burden and safety of controls, really the safety concerns and feeling responsible. And sober individuals often feel a burden of responsibility for the drunk person, their safety and well-being, and this includes worry about them driving, falling, getting into fights, or making decisions that they're going to regret. And this is an unwanted emotional labour. And then there's the physical incompetenceness. So drunkenness often impairs motor skills, leading to clumsiness, spills, falling, or vomiting. And this behaviour is messy, embarrassing, and requires the sober person to clean up or intervene. And then there is the risk of aggression. So while all drunk people are not aggressive, alcohol is a key factor in many violent conflict situations. And this creates an atmosphere of potential threat that sober people naturally want to avoid. In short, people dislike being around drunk individuals because the interactions are typically draining, unpredictable, frustration sets in, and often centers entirely on the needs of the intoxicated person rather than the balanced, mutually respectful exchange. So how do you avoid becoming drunk? As opposed to just drinking alcohol, it is primarily a matter of managing the rate and the amount of alcohol consumption relative to your body's ability to process it. What does that all mean? So here are 3 strategies. Manage the pace and ratio. The most critical factor in sobriety is the speed in which alcohol enters your bloodstream. So there is the 1-for-1 rule. For every standard alcohol drink, i.e. 1 can of beer, 1 glass of wine, or 1 shot of liquor, Consume 1 full glass water or a non-alcoholic beverage. So this is going to slow down the rate of alcohol intake significantly and keeps you hydrated as well, which reduces the severity of impairments and, of course, later onset of hangovers. Set a time limit. Aim to have no more than 1 standard drink per hour, and this gives your liver adequate time to metabolize the alcohol, and your body can generally only process about 1 standard drink per hour. So drinking faster, this is just a guarantee of intoxication. How about sip, don't gulp? Consciously treat your drink like a fine beverage to be tasted slowly rather than a thirst quencher. The next thing you can do is eat a substantial meal beforehand. So food that's particularly fat and protein filled, and it's the best natural defense against rapid intoxication. So you never drink on an empty stomach. Basically, alcohol is absorbed much faster in the small intestine when the stomach is empty, and alcohol passes through it quickly. So choose fat and protein. Eat a meal rich in protein and fat, i.e. steak, cheese, nuts, pasta with a cream sauce. These macronutrients or micronutrients take longer to digest, keeping the sphincter or the valve between your stomach and the small intestine closed longer. This means that alcohol is held in the stomach, where it's absorbed slower instead of rushing into the small intestine. So snack throughout. So in the event of a long, continuous event, eat small, not salty snacks like cheese, cube or bread. Throughout the time, you should be drinking to keep your stomach lining active. So use self-control strategies or the decisional shield. Use planning and conscious choices to avoid falling victim to peer pressure or impulsive behavior. So establish a drink limit before you start. So before you take your first sip, decide on specific non-negotiable limits, i.e. I will have 3 drinks tonight maximum. Communicate this limit to a trusted friend who can get hold of you and make you accountable. Choose lower ABV or alcohol by volume drinks. Opt for drinks with lower alcohol content. For example, choose light beer, over craft beer, wine spritzers over straight wine. And if you're drinking mixed drinks, use a large amount of non-alcoholic mixer to dilute the alcohol. Alternate your drinks, make it your last drink non-alcoholic. And if you hit your limit, switch entirely to water, soda or mocktails. Holding a non-alcoholic drink prevents others from noticing that you've stopped and eliminates that urge to accept another round. So that wraps up episode 80, and the bottom line is, staying sober and in control while drinking is not about sheer willpower. It's about planning, timing and strategy. You can enjoy social benefits in the event without suffering the psychological fallout and the awful consequences of getting drunk. Remember the 3 defense steps. Manage the pace and ratio. Stick to the 1-1-1-1 rule. 1 non-alcoholic drink every alcoholic drink, and aim for no more than 1 standard drink per hour. Eat substantially. Choose a meal that's rich in protein beforehand and slow the alcohol absorption rate. And use that decisional shield. Set yourself a maximum drink limit before you leave the house and stick to it to avoid impulsive choices later. By following these strategies, you maintain your control, your predictability, and your self-respect. Thank you for joining me on No Nonsense Psychiatry. If this episode gave you some practical tools for your next social outing, please share it with anybody who needs that simple plan to stay sharp. Until the next time, plan wisely and stay in control.
Before we go, if you found the podcast helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit from it. You can also support the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It only takes a moment, but it makes a big difference in helping us reach more people. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode of No Nonsense Psychiatry.
No nonsense.